Chapter 1-1, Flying Route. Pham then had great difficulty opening his eyelids, looking at his fingertips and counting the things he had done in his life. The result was that nothing had any meaning. After a while of looking at the 5 fingers as thin as 5 chopsticks mentally counting, he sighed and sadly let go of this job. The medicinal water in the hospital room always had such a pungent taste. Looking at the empty bed on both sides, the old man who had been lying here 2 days ago had returned to be with the Buddha. It would probably be my turn in just a few days. He suffers from some strange disease, with symptoms of impotence, especially similar to the disease of the main character in a certain novel. I heard that one day I won't be able to move, I can only let the tears flow. But aren't you the main character in a romance novel? Pham then muttered, but because his jaw muscles had no effect, his voice became just a series of sleep words. He looked at the tip of his middle finger and thought to himself, I'm still a virgin. Indeed, in this life, he has never done anything meaningful, except helping an old woman cross the main road, giving up his seat on the bus, getting along with his neighbors, and helping his friends cheat in illegal activities. Exam. Pham then is a useless man in the most traditional sense. His parents passed away early, leaving him alone in the hospital. Waiting for the day his life would come to an end. Good people don't have luck. Alone and alone in the dead of night, Pham then clearly felt his throat slowly relax, unable to tense up any more. His breathing gradually disappeared like a soft rubber band without any strength. So, I don't know where the nurse in the hospital ran off to. Next to me was only my aunt. Her eyes were painful and she kept talking, but it wasn't clear what she said. Am I supposed to die? Fear of death along with the desire to enjoy life made a complex feeling he had never felt before. Taking care of me before my death was unexpectedly not the beautiful and lovely young nurse I expected, but this person, who undoubtedly increased the melancholy in Pham than's heart. Feeling cold and pitiful, he lowered his eyes and looked at the black cloth blocking the sunlight from the railing, thinking, human life is as lonely as dog shit, cold and pitiful. A tear flowed down from the corner of his eye. Pham then felt a little sad, stretched out his tongue to lick the falling tears, but was surprised to discover that his tears not only tasted salty, but also had a slight smell of something. Maybe it was because they were inside. Hospitals rarely shower, even tears are starting to smell. He couldn't help but get angry and scolded in his heart. I told you tears were falling all over your face, then tears were falling all over your face. Are you really dreaming of the main character in a romance novel? But he immediately realized that things were a bit unreasonable. Why could his tongue still reach out to lick his tears? The doctor said that the tip of my tongue had long lost its ability to function. Now its only function is to help me eat more easily. Because my respiratory tract is damaged, I can become a swallowing genius. Suicide tongue is very rare in the world. Then he discovered that rolling his eyes became easier. His vision became clearer, and his eyesight became much better than before. In front of him was a clear scene. A piece of bamboo appeared before his eyes. Pham then was originally stunned when suddenly next to the bamboo sticks, a scene appeared that surprised and frightened him. A dozen people dressed in black were filled with murderous aura, holding sharp weapons in their hands, slashing at themselves. For a moment, he didn't have time to think whether this was a dream or real life. He purely reflexively instinctively shrank his head and raised his hands to block it in front of his face. In return, any normal person who encounters this situation can only choose to do the same. Whoosh! Countless wind-breaking sounds rang out. Immediately after, there were countless screams of pain, followed by a piece of silence. After a while, Pham then felt something was wrong, carefully moved his fingers to cover his face and secretly looked outside. The basket was woven from bamboo with small gaps, and looking through these gaps, one could see more than 10 corpses lying on the ground, their bodies covered in blood. And the fishy smell rising to the sky. Pham then was scared. The scene before his eyes was too clear, making him stunned again. Right after that, he suddenly thought about how he could raise his hand to cover his face. Could it be that his hand could also move? Could it be that my illness is really cured? But what is the final story? Could it be just a dream? When he woke up, he was lying motionless on that bed. Could he only be a disabled person waiting to die? If that's really the case, it's better not to wake up from the dream. At least my hands can still move, my eyes can still blink. He thought a bit sadly and touched his wet face with his hand. When he pulled back his hand, he discovered that his hand was all red blood. It turned out that the fluid that had just flowed down from the corner of his small eye was someone's blood splashed on his face. Pham then looked at his hand in bewilderment, wanting to scream in his heart, "This is absolutely not his hand." In front of him was a pair of small, white hands that were incomparably lovely. The surface of the hands covered in red blood looked devilish, like a white lotus blooming in an azure. His small arms, absolutely not that of an adult. The continuous shocks impacting Pham brain left him stunned. Countless terrifying and incomparable doubts were taking over his body and mind. This year is the 57th year of the Qing dynasty. His Majesty the Emperor personally led the army to conquer the Western Manchus. It has not yet ended. Count Simon is also in the army. The capital is controlled by the Queen Mother and the Council of Elders. Consul, today, Tai Bin Villa on the outskirts of the capital's capital suddenly caught fire. A group of masters took advantage of the fire to jump into the mansion, killing people upon meeting them, creating a shocking murder. A young servant of the courtyard escaped with the young master in the darkness, was chased by a group of villains wearing night clothes, and the two sides fought all the way to the intersection in the south outside the city. But the ambush expert not only did not expect that this young man was an unfathomable powerhouse, and that when he entered the hills and mountains, there were reinforcements, but the identity of the reinforcements made these people constantly afraid. Scared, the Black Knight. Almost none of the villains were shot dead by crossbow arrows, so there was no one left, who shouted indignantly before falling into a pool of blood. The reinforcement sat on horses, wearing black armor, under the moonlight in the sky, emitting a deep, splendid light. In their hands, the cavalrymen all held bows and crossbows that only the army was allowed to distribute and use. The light crossbow shot caused the majority of assassins to die. The black cavalry surrounded and protected the middle-aged man sitting in a carriage. This man's face was a bit pale and his chin had a few thin whiskers. He looked at the child on the young servant's back, nodded, then patted his hand. The sound of applause is the signal to attack. The cavalry divided into a team, like a death scythe in the dark night, without any mercy rushing into the group of assassins who were dying and suffering grievously. Suddenly, among the assassins, there was a magician who raised his staff in his hand and began to chant a spell. Everyone in the yard felt a little bit of the energy fluctuations coming from the surrounding hills and mountains. The middle-aged man on the carriage frowned slightly and did not make any movement. Suddenly, a black shadow behind him jumped out, gently and enthusiastically, like a hawk hunting in the night sky. There was a sharp sound. The mage's chant was interrupted. His head fell to the ground. Blood sprayed like rain. The middle-aged man sitting in the carriage shook his head. These Western magicians always don't know who they are. In front of the real powerhouses, that bit of magic is like the brush of a great prime minister, without any effect. More than a dozen black cavalrymen have confirmed that the surrounding area is safe, holding their right hand in a defensive stance to report that all the assassins have been eliminated. The cavalry team separated and the carriage slowly moved forward, arriving in front of the young servant. The middle-aged man on the carriage was then helped down from the wheelchair by the servants. His feet did not touch the ground. The wheelchair slowly approached the middle of the yard. Approaching the young man who was still standing straight as a spear, after looking at the young servant for a long time, the pale face of the middle-aged man sitting in the carriage finally appeared a little red. In the end, nothing unfortunate happened. That person had a bamboo basket on his back, a black cloth covering his eyes, and a black flying sword in his hand, with fresh blood slowly dripping from the blade. There were many corpses next to him, all of them were ambushed by experts. All of the corpses had blood left on their throats. It looked like they had all died from a fatal blow. I need you to give me some justice in this matter, the young man with his eyes covered by a black cloth said coldly. His voice did not tremble at all, nor did he have a trace of emotion. The middle-aged man sitting on the cart said with a hidden expression, I will naturally give you justice, I also have to give an explanation to the master. The young servant nodded, then prepared to leave. Where do you want to take this child? The middle-aged man sitting on the cart said coldly, you are a blind person, how could you take your young master with you to wander around the world? This is the lady's remains, also my master's flesh and blood. The middle-aged man on the cart said coldly, I guarantee to find your young master a safe place in the capital. The man shook his head and pulled the black cloth over his eyes. The middle-aged man sitting on the cart knew that in addition to listening to his young lady, even his master could not give him orders. He could do nothing but sigh and advise. Things are happening in the capital. When the master returns, he will definitely be able to quell the chaos, so you have to definitely take him away. I don't trust your master. The middle-aged man frowned slightly as if he didn't like the other person's words. After a long pause, he said, this child must be able to eat and drink, know how to read and write. Can you do this? He smiled coldly and said, you're blind, besides killing people, what else can you do? The other person wasn't angry, just gently pushed the bamboo basket and said, you suck, you seem to only know how to kill people. The middle-aged man smiled darkly, this time, only the princes and nobles in the capital will attack. When my master returns, I will naturally begin to liquidate them. The blind teenager shook his head. The middle-aged man gently stroked his hand on the side of the stroller, as if he was guessing what the other person was afraid of. After a moment, he frowned and said, I know what you are afraid of now, but here in this secular world, except for the child's father who can protect it, who else can protect it from evil? Unforeseen danger. The blind teenager suddenly opened his mouth to speak, his voice still without any emotion, new identity, not disturbed by human life. The middle-aged man thought for a moment, smiled and nodded. Where, damn Chowport, the owner's midwife is there now. After a moment of silence, the blind teenager finally accepted this arrangement. The middle-aged man smiled and pushed the stroller to move behind the blind teenager, reached into the bamboo basket and picked up the baby, looked at the baby's cute little face and sighed and said, the baby really looks like his mother. He will grow up to be very beautiful like his mother. He suddenly laughed and said, this little guy definitely has a future. His subordinates were still standing silently in the distance. Suddenly, they heard the man's long, satisfied laugh. Although his eyes remained expressionless, deep inside he was very scared, not knowing. What kind of important person is this kid? Yes. The blind teenager tilted his head and reached out to pick up the baby. Although he was simpler than a normal person, he didn't want the baby's face to be too close to his snake hands, and at the same time used a syllable denoting pure ritual. The middle-aged man smiled and looked at the child's face. In his smile, there was something unspeakable, especially frightening. The other person wasn't angry, just gently pushed the bamboo basket and said. A 2-month-old baby unexpectedly could raise his hand to wipe the blood from his face. Having gone through such a terrible night and still being able to sleep peacefully in one place, it's truly amazing. His voice suddenly became very low, ensuring his subordinates could not hear his next words. child of a person with heavenly veins. This middle-aged man holds a high position in the capital. His methods are incomparably cruel. Whenever an official commits a crime and falls into his hands, within 2 days he will reveal his true feelings. His eyes will be even more sinister. But even if he was an extraordinary character, it was impossible to see that this child did not sleep soundly, but was so frightened that he fainted. People have heavenly veins. Heaven refers to the high sky, veins refers to blood veins. People with heavenly veins mean that the blood of heaven and earth remains on earth. There is a legend in this world that every few hundred years, the bloodline of a heavenly fairy will awaken in the human world. This type of bloodline represents powerful combat power that cannot be resisted by anything, such as the great general of the ancient Nasi nation, when the nation was almost destroyed by the barbarians, making history by relying only on his brave fighting power. His personal power, assassinating most of the members of the original Conference of the Man. There are also people whose celestial veins manifest in addition to their intellectual and artistic talents, such as the great magician Ba-Er of the West and his wife Phuc Bo, a great playwright who died 300 years ago. Of course, no one can prove that they left their bloodlines because heaven cared about the suffering of humanity. But in reality, some people have brought peace to humanity or something very big. Moreover, the owners of the heavenly veins eventually disappeared without a trace. No one, or even any country, could find their whereabouts. They just suddenly appeared, then suddenly disappeared, except for leaving behind some obscure records, leaving nothing behind to prove their existence. The middle-aged man sitting on the stroller was one of the few people who knew that this kind of person with heavenly veins existed. For unknown reasons, when Pham Nhan died, his soul entered this world, and then was reincarnated into the body of a child, and this child's father or mother did not expect it. Is a person with the most mysterious and unpredictable heavenly veins on this continent. At dawn, the battlefield was swept clean, and the carriages slowly followed the paved road to the east. Around the carriage, a team of black cavalry walked around a pale-faced middle-aged man sitting in a cart, creating a very sinister picture. The carriage tripped over a stone and wobbled a bit, causing the baby sleeping in the soft silk to suddenly wake up. The child's eyes were a bit soulless, looking away from the faces of those who had just saved his life, looking out at the front of the carriage. Completely unlike the actions of a newborn baby, his eyes were clear and incomparable. But there was no way to concentrate. There were more than a few flashes of confusion. No one knows. Inside the baby's soft body is the soul of a person from another world. The view is wide open. The car's curtain is lifted by the wind, revealing a corner of the green mountains and forests in the distance along with the stone road receding, like countless paintings constantly reversing. In front of the carriage, the blind teenager was clutching his sword in his hand. The black cloth covering his eyes was as dark as today.